The Egyptian Empire. It was the genesis of grand kingdoms, the first true power the world had ever witnessed. This monumental civilization was forged from stone, the shifting sands, and an unwavering faith, rooted in the profound conviction that time itself could be mastered. Its narrative began around 3150 BCE, when the distinct realms of Upper and Lower Egypt were brought together under a single crown. The Nile River became its vital artery, its annual life-giving floods sustaining a land that would otherwise have been desolate. From this cyclical rhythm, an empire of unparalleled scale and ambition was born. They revered their rulers as pharaohs, believing them to be gods manifested in human form. These divine monarchs were not merely thought to govern the living, but to command eternity itself. Every towering monument they erected, every intricate tomb they meticulously carved, served as an enduring pledge to the afterlife. Their construction was not for fleeting decades, but conceived for perpetual existence. By the era of the New Kingdom, Egypt had ascended to its zenith, a true golden age. Illustrious pharaohs such as Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, and Ramesses II marshaled their formidable armies far beyond the desert borders, extending their dominion by conquering Nubia to the south and Canaan to the north. Temples soared majestically towards the heavens, and the deities Ra, Osiris, and Amuni's appeared to preside over an eternal order. Yet, even eternity harbors a weakness. Within the hallowed halls of the temples, a new dynamic emerged as priests began to openly challenge the authority of the kings. Corruption, like an insidious current, permeated the royal palaces. The once predictable and faithful floods of the Nile grew erratic, leading to devastating agricultural failures. With failing harvests, the very faith of the people began to waver. It was then that Akhenaten, the enigmatic heretic pharaoh, ascended to the throne. He controversially abandoned Egypt's ancient pantheon in favor of a singular god, Aten, the solar disk itself. For a brief, radical period, he was convinced he could fundamentally reshape the concept of eternity. Instead, he inadvertently fractured the very bedrock of his own sprawling empire. Following his death, Akhenaten's name was systematically erased from history, his ambitious city abandoned, and his revolutionary faith all but forgotten. By the reign of Ramesses III, Egypt found itself embattled on every front, struggling against waves of foreign invaders, widespread hunger, and crippling internal divisions. The enigmatic Sea Peoples encroached from the north, while Libyan raiders struck from the west. Each hard-won victory demanded a greater toll than the last, until even triumph carried the bitter taste of defeat. When Ramesses XI passed away around 1070 BCE, the once mighty empire irrevocably splintered into two distinct halves. Priests assumed control of the south, while generals governed the north. The kingdom that had once commanded the resources to erect monumental pyramids for its gods could no longer provide sustenance for its own populace. And yet, amidst this decline, they defiantly refused to concede to death. They continued to mummify their deceased kings, meticulously carved prayers into enduring stone, and filled their tombs with precious gold, firmly convinced that life would persist beyond the mortal veil. They meticulously built for the next world, for they understood that this one was inherently impermanent. The Egyptian empire did not collapse in a single, cataclysmic night. Rather, it slowly receded over the course of many centuries. It endlessly pursued immortality, only to ultimately discover a legacy of magnificent ruins. But perhaps, in this paradox, lies its unique secret. For while every subsequent empire has inevitably risen and fallen, only Egypt endures, not in temporal power, but eternally in human memory. The Roman Empire. Rome was not merely built in a day, but its grand fall unfolded in a protracted, slow-motion descent. It began, humbly, as a whisper of a dream amidst the dust, a modest kingdom nestled beside the winding Tiber River, destined one day to encompass the entire known world. Its founding, as legend had it, was by the mythical twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, famously suckled by a she-wolf. Its very origins were a captivating blend of ancient myth and potent prophecy. Yet, this legend undeniably crystallized into reality. Through unwavering discipline, relentless ambition, and the allure of eternal glory, Rome blossomed from a humble cluster of villages into an empire that would indelibly sculpt the subsequent 2 millennia of human history. By the 1st century of the Common Era, Rome had established itself as the vibrant, pulsating heart of global civilization. Its meticulously engineered roads extended for an astounding 50,000 miles, intricately binding together a diverse population of over 70 million souls. Its legions marched with unmatched precision and formidable might. Its sophisticated laws codified and defined the very concept of justice, while its awe-inspiring architecture reached boldly for the heavens. The colossal Colosseum, the intricate aqueducts, the gleaming marble forums, these were not mere monuments. They stood as tangible evidence of Rome's profound belief in its own eternal nature. Under Augustus, the pioneering first emperor, dawned the Pax Romana, a golden era of 2 centuries marked by unprecedented peace and widespread prosperity. Trade routes flourished, cities shimmered with artistic brilliance and intellectual enlightenment, and from the rugged shores of Britain to the ancient lands of Egypt, the majestic eagle of Rome cast its long, formidable shadow. To the astonished world, it appeared utterly invincible, an empire unmistakably blessed by the gods themselves. But even the mightiest gods cannot halt the relentless march of decay. Accumulated wealth inevitably gave rise to rampant corruption. Senators openly sold their loyalty, betraying the very ideals they swore to uphold. Emperors ascended and fell with alarming frequency, some tragically murdered by their own guards before the dawn of a new day. The Roman populace, once proud and engaged citizens, gradually transformed into passive spectators, satiated by bread and circuses, basic sustenance, and brutal entertainment. Rome's inherent strength began to erode into mere spectacle, its once unifying purpose dissolving into chaotic disarray. Then came Constantine the Great, an emperor who boldly sought to rekindle Rome's fading glory. He embraced Christianity, fundamentally reshaping the empire's spiritual landscape, and in 330 CE, he controversially shifted the empire's capital eastward to Byzantium, a city later reborn as Constantinople. In this pivotal act, however, he irrevocably cleaved the empire into 2 distinct entities, East and West, 2 Romes with 2 divergent destinies. While the eastern half would bravely endure for centuries, the Western Empire steadily weakened, relentlessly drained by incessant wars and insatiable greed. Barbarian tribes, sensing the deepening fissures in an empire once deemed immortal, pressed harder against its beleaguered borders. In 410 CE, the unthinkable transpired. The venerable city of Rome itself was brutally sacked by the Visigoths. And in 476 CE, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, Romulus Augustulus, was ignominiously deposed. The Eternal City, the empire that had for so long dictated the fate of the world, had finally succumbed. Yet, perhaps this was always its fated trajectory. Rome's most formidable adversary was never truly the barbarians besieging its gates. Its ultimate nemesis was time itself, patient, silent, and utterly unconquered. The Mongol Empire. An empire does not invariably emerge from the solidity of stone and the permanency of cities. Sometimes, it manifests from the whispering winds and the limitless dust of the vast, unending steppes. In the year 1206, a man named Temujin stood upon the banks of the Onon River and proclaimed a new, resonant name, Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. What began as a loose federation of disparate nomadic tribes would astonishingly burgeon into the largest contiguous land empire in all of recorded history, stretching majestically from the shimmering Pacific Ocean to the distant shores of the Mediterranean Sea, thereby forging unprecedented connections between worlds that had previously remained utterly isolated. Within a mere few decades, the Mongols had spectacularly conquered more territory than Rome had managed to subdue over centuries. Their formidable mounted archers moved with an almost phantom-like speed and precision across the immense landscapes. Their military strategies were at once brutal and ingeniously brilliant, and their boundless ambition knew absolutely no geographical limits. By the late 13th century, Mongol dominion encompassed a staggering 9 million square miles. They did not merely conquer, they unified. The fabled Silk Road flourished under their protective aegis, allowing a free and unprecedented flow of ideas, innovations, and goods between the East and the West. For a significant period, it genuinely seemed that the Mongol peace, or Pax Mongolica, might indeed last forever. However, empires constructed upon the foundation of relentless conquest inherently carry the insidious seeds of their own eventual destruction. The first cracks appeared not from external adversaries, but from within the very heart of the royal family itself. When Mongke Khan died in 1259, his powerful brothers immediately plunged into a bitter war of succession. Kublai Khan audaciously claimed the imperial throne in China, while Ariq declared himself the rightful ruler in Mongolia. A devastating civil war erupted, and the monolithic empire that had been so forcefully forged by one man's singular vision began to fragment under the competing ambitions of his grandsons. By 1294, the year of Kublai Khan's death, the once unified Mongol Empire had irreparably fractured into four distinct khanates, each pursuing its own sovereign path and developing a unique identity. And then, something arrived that no earthly army could ever hope to defeat: the terrifying Black Death. This devastating plague swept ferociously through the empire in the 1340s, claiming millions of lives, severing crucial trade routes, and plunging the already struggling khanates into utter chaos. In China, the Mongol rulers grew increasingly distant and detached from the vast populace they governed. They never truly grasped the agricultural heartland they controlled, nor did they ever genuinely integrate with the sophisticated Chinese civilization. Discontented peasants revolted, initially not as fervent nationalists, but as desperate farmers crushed under the unbearable weight of exorbitant taxes and chronic neglect. A former monk named Zhu Chongba emerged to lead this burgeoning rebellion, and in 1368, he successfully drove the Mongols from Beijing, thereby establishing the illustrious Ming dynasty. One by one, the remaining khanates crumbled. The Ilkhanate collapsed in 1335, the Yuan dynasty rulers retreated back to the steppes, and the Golden Horde fractured into numerous warring tribes. By 1687, the last vestiges of the once mighty Mongol Empire had finally vanished. The Mongol Empire had conquered much of the world, but in the end, it proved incapable of governing itself. For ultimately, the gravest threat to any empire is not the enemy besieging its gates. It is the insidious forces of internal division, devastating disease, and the quiet, simmering rebellion of those it neglected to understand. The British Empire. There was a time when maps of the world were famously painted a striking red. This was an empire so astonishingly vast, so globally powerful, that the sun, it was often proclaimed, literally never set on its territories, for somewhere, at any given moment, a British flag proudly fluttered under daylight. At its zenith in 1920, the British Empire held sway over an incredible 412 million people, representing nearly a quarter of all humanity, and extended its dominion across a breathtaking 13.7 million square miles of land. From the arid deserts of Africa to the lush jungles of Asia, from the frozen northern reaches of Canada to the remote islands of the Pacific, Britain commanded them all. Its meteoric rise was fueled by unparalleled naval supremacy, the transformative power of the Industrial Revolution, and an unyielding, often ruthless ambition. Its formidable ships controlled the global oceans, its powerful banks dictated international trade, and its distinctive culture spread far and wide across continents. The Pax Britannica, or the British peace, an era of relative global stability, profoundly shaped and defined an entire century. It appeared eternal, utterly unshakable, seemingly destined to endure forever. But ambition, when left unchecked, inevitably constructs its own gilded prison. The First World War catastrophically shattered this illusion of invincibility. Britain emerged victorious, and its territorial holdings expanded to their largest extent ever. But this triumph came at a devastating human and economic cost. Millions perished, the national economy was pushed to its breaking point, and an entire generation was irrevocably lost. The empire had grown too geographically vast to effectively defend, and far too expensive to adequately maintain. Across its myriad colonies, the subtle whispers of independence began to amplify into a discernible chorus. Then came the Second World War. Britain stood defiantly against the existential threat of Nazi Germany, but the financial and human cost was truly catastrophic. By 1945, the nation was essentially bankrupt, its survival contingent only upon a massive loan from the United States. The humiliating fall of Singapore in 1942 had irreparably tarnished British prestige in Asia. The supposedly impregnable fortress had crumbled in mere days, starkly revealing to the world that Britain could no longer effectively safeguard its sprawling empire. The global balance of power had decisively shifted, with the United States and the Soviet Union now firmly positioned at the center of the world stage. In 1947, India, often hailed as the jewel in the crown of the empire, finally achieved its hard-won independence, though this momentous event was tragically marred by the displacement of 14 million people during the painful partition. The empire's most valuable possession was now irrevocably gone. However, the final, decisive blow to Britain's global standing arrived in 1956, during the Suez Crisis. When Egypt's President Nasser nationalized the vital Suez Canal, Britain, in conjunction with France and Israel, launched an invasion. Yet, critically, America vehemently refused to endorse the operation and threatened to deliberately destabilize the British currency if they did not immediately withdraw. Humiliated and isolated, Britain was forced to retreat. It was widely dubbed Britain's Waterloo, the undeniable moment the world realized that Britain was no longer a preeminent global power. The wind of change swept across Africa in the 1960s, as colony after colony proudly declared its independence. By 1997, when Hong Kong was peacefully handed back to China, the Grand British Empire had, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist. The British Empire was not defeated by external enemies. It was utterly exhausted by 2 world wars, bankrupted by the sheer scale of its own imperial ambitions, and ultimately abandoned by the relentless currents of history. For in the end, even the colossal empire on which the sun never set must inevitably confront the long, twilight night.